Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Darby here with Joe Lissette, and we are on round 3 of our modern 5K here in Indianapolis, Indiana. We've had a couple sweet rounds so far. We have a few other great matches queued up for you and just about to start. We went a bit over time for this last round, so we wanted to come back a little bit early and, I don't know, just break down the tournament so far. Joe, what have you been seeing so far at the top tables?
Well, I've seen a little bit of a mess. I was watching from most of this round green-white Heliod combo versus Eldrazi aggro, and I didn't see game 1, which was won by the Heliod deck. I walked up in the middle of game 2, and it took me a minute to figure out what was going on because the Eldrazi player didn't seem very interested in applying pressure, and that turned out to be because the Heliod player is at infinite life already, and they ended up being decked. So they went to game 3, and there was a lot of life gain, and it was a draw. I've seen several draws over there already. I saw Tron winning, like traditional Tron. I saw Blue Eye Control beating. Actually, one of the players that's on camera this round, I watched beat Mono Red Prowess last round with Blue Eye Control. It looked timing reinforcements. That's kind of an obstacle. And yeah, I haven't seen too many combo decks running around. I don't know what you guys had combo on camera, right?
Yeah, last round we had the opportunity to watch Storm a little bit. Not a deck that's gotten anything new. Amulet decks are floating around a little bit, and there's also just less kind of combo, kind of more traditional sort of Valakut-based Green-White Titan decks too. So a couple different flavors of that archetype I think is interesting. You can choose kind of resilience or explosiveness, and yeah, it seems like Pioneers actually has a pretty, Modern has a pretty good spread here in our tournament today. And if you're interested in the metagame breakdown, that is available on our Twitter handle. That is the NRG series. So take a look at that if you're interested in the kind of more precise numbers, and we'll see if our players are pretty close to being ready to go. Hopefully we can jump down to the table here soon. And funny enough, I actually heard another story about infinite life leading to the person with infinite life getting decked.
Okay.
And multiple times this tournament's pretty wild.
Yeah.
Got to get creative when your opponent puts a combo like that together. And, you know, what some of the old Birthing Pod, Malira Pod combo decks, they had access to infinite life, but they also had a Murderous Redcap combo to make sure the game ends. So, a lot of decks in Modern might find some way to kind of skirt that. And we'll be featuring a deck like that here this round with Infect playing against Blue Light Control.
So this Blue Light Control player is actually one of a small group of players from Southern California that I knew that decided we want to be able to play more paper Magic. So they actually they moved to Pennsylvania to be more kind of in the heart of where you can drive every direction to tournaments on a lot of weekends. And they actually made the trek out here this weekend for the first time. So Ivan Espinoza playing Blue Eye Control is one of those players. And we're going to have him on camera this round. Yeah, like you're saying, playing against Infect, which anytime you're playing Path to Exile against a deck that is trying to load up on one creature, you're probably feeling okay, but still, Infect is scary, and things can get out of hand real fast.
Yeah, Path to Exile, some of the premium removal against Infect, but they still have access to functional counterspells for just as much mana. Blossoming Defense is a tough card to work around, and it almost just puts a tax on you to really never tap all the way out all game, unless, of course, you're sitting on a couple copies of Force of Negation.
Right.
And here we see Brandon with the pretty critical turn 1 Glistener Elf, making sure to apply pressure early and often. And
I would so much rather see Noble Hierarch come out every single time if I'm on the other side of the table. But it's always Glistener Elf. And then you're being threatened to die in, turn 3. Turn 2 is possible, but it's just you have to be on guard right away.
Yeah, one of the kind of smaller inclusions or maybe less notable additions from Modern Horizons was actually Scale Up. For those who don't know, that is a 1-mana pump spell that basically turns a creature, I believe, into a 6/4. So that is +5/+5 when you put it on a Glistener Elf, and that's pretty, kind of a key component to enable some of the turn 2 kills.
Yeah, it's from back in the original days, it's the Crawworm card, the 6/4 for 6 mana. If you would have asked me a couple years ago, how much would it take to have a spell to turn a creature into a Crawworm until the end of the turn, I would have said, I don't know, 3 seems fair. But 1 is what it costs. And so it does see some play. There are 3 copies in Brandon's deck.
And here we see Brandon kind of not exactly going all in, but playing a Might of Old Crowza to threaten half of the requisite poison that Ivan needs to lose this game. And, Teferi coming down actually a very powerful card against Infect just forces some pretty obvious telegraphing of kind of combo or pump spell intentions.
Yeah, and I wonder if Brandon here, we might even have to blossoming defense just to keep the listener off on the board, because Ivan, I imagine, would just go ahead and bounce the elf right off the board, right off the table, and then feel fairly safe.
Yeah, and these Infect lists are blue-green, so curious to see if there's any counter spells. But no, Brandon just using Vines of the Vastwood to protect the listener elf, like you mentioned. And honestly, if you're playing Teferi, that's fine. It'll go up to 5. Ivan has a Force of Negation in hand to, from his perspective, hopefully stop any shenanigans. But that being said, already at 5 poison, could die even through 1 counterspell.
It's nice, though, that Ivan gets to save the loyalty because of the static effect on Teferi Time Raveler, Brandon's forced to actually not respond to the activation, but even to the spell being cast.
And here we see Brandon adding to his board a little bit with both an Inkmoth Nexus and a Blighted Agent. So even if a sweeper should come down, Supreme Verdict would be powerful, but Inkmoth Nexus would do kind of all the same function while also being a little bit, resilient to most things. Unfortunately, with Teferi speeding up sweepers, it can actually still be a bit of a problem to get that creature in.
Yeah, this is really, Brandon, I mean, like you're saying, Supreme Verdict would be good. Anything other than that, and Ivan's going to have a hard time because it's not like he's going to be able to deploy a slew of blockers. And when there's just the one creature with pump spells is in a lot of ways easier to deal with than multiple creatures coming in one after another.
Yeah, and it's kind of one of the key differences that separates blue-white control from some of the Bant Stoneblade lists we've seen. Ice Fang Quaddle kind of gives you an extra bit of insurance against creatures attacking you in decks like Death Shadow and Infect here. And Brandon's kind of putting his foot down, trying to go for the kill, scale up on Glistener Elf representing well over lethal poison. And Ivan's kind of question is, well, how do I deal with this? There is a Force, and I think also a Path to Exile hanging out in hands.
Well, it's already resolved, so we're going to see... Okay, we are going to see. Is this Cryptic Command here choosing... What are we doing here? Bounce and draw, so effectively countering the scale up for free, so very nice advantage for Ivan there, and he's not going to take a hit from the Nexus either. Turn he has to be pretty happy about.
Yeah, Brandon instead kind of opting to get Blighted Agent on the battlefield, and, there's not a ton of ways blue-white control can interact with creatures, but Snapcaster Mage is one that Brandon has to be aware of, and that's one upside the Blighted Agent's unblockability provides over the cheaper Glistener Elf.
So Ivan with a lot of cards in hand here, he's done 6 Infect, but I feel like he's in a spot where, without seeing the hands, his position looks pretty comfortable, although having a lot of mana to get the Blighted Agent off the board, I'm now feeling vulnerable again if I'm him.
But yeah, it's one of the big additions of what Force can really do. Allow these Planeswalkers to be cast, and, Teferi also giving you the ability to confidently unsummon without worrying about a blossoming defense.
Yeah, a year ago, Ivan would likely be dead right now, but in addition to every other card printed last year pretty much, Force of Negation, very strong, and... Really, when it was first printed, it kind of said, well, this is all worse than Force of Will. I don't know how good is this card, and it has had a huge impact.
Yeah, how do you feel about the power level of it? A card that you can't necessarily use in degenerate combo shells. Do you think it's appropriate for some of these control decks to have?
I do. I like, for Modern, because for a few years, conversations would occasionally come up, like, would Modern be better if Force of Will got reprinted into it? And I actually argued yes. But I think this is even better because sometimes with blue combo decks, Force Will gets used aggressively, and that's really not what we wanted to have in Modern. But I think a defense-only Force effect worked out very well, and it has improved the format, slowed down some of the faster combo decks, and like Blue-White Control is really one of the primary decks playing this card, and is Blue-White Control overpowered? I don't think so. I think it's just a fine deck. So I think they did a good job on designing the card.
Yeah, and here we actually see a great pickup here for Ivan, finding Field of Ruin, one of the pretty clean ways to take out Inkmoth Nexus, and it's tough for Brandon's perspective. Jace is threatening to unsummon your creatures turn after turn, and not a clear path to kind of break through this, even though Ivan's all the way up to 7 Infect.
Yeah, it's super frustrating with Jace, because Jace, maybe you go bounce, 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 but probably you go bounce, bounce, brainstorm, and then as the Infect player, you just feel so far behind. But we'll see. Oh, actually, okay. So in this case, it's just going to be bounced the first time, and then Ivan's going to go for cards right now. I wonder if that signifies that he feels like either he has the Glistener Elf covered with a removal spell, or like you were saying, maybe just a creature to come down and block it.
Yeah, pretty interesting. I think it's fair to read that as a bit of a show of strength from Ivan, and kind of one of those things that, yeah, you know, sometimes there are those players who are dedicated to brainstorm until they die, just zero every turn. And
I am not one of those players. I am in the camp where if Jace is brainstorming, that's because you couldn't find a use for any of the other modes, because they're all better. And that's not necessarily true, but I do like all the options it provides.
And here we see another new card, Wings of Abandon, Modern Horizon inclusion, functioning to exile that Glistener Elf, and just kind of, it's a nice sort of fifth path to exile in Blue-Eye Control. You really rather not play a card like Condemn or, you know, what Oust is the other one sometimes. So
yeah, there's definitely a number of options as kind of your access removal spell beyond path. And the Wings of Abandon, there's one copy is?
Yeah, just one copy. Yep.
Okay, sure. And it also can function as a sweeper later on. It's nicely versatile, although giving the opponent a land is generally a drawback, although I don't believe we had one to find here. Is Brandon maxed out at his 2 forests?
Yeah, it appears to be the case, yeah. Even though Infect is just a 2-color deck, it has a lot of utility lands between Inkmoth Nexus, a couple copies of Breeding Pool. You know, sometimes there's Pendlehaven or even Dryad Arbor showing up here, and yeah, it looks like
2 Pendlehaven in this list. Alongside, yeah, there's a Waterlogged Grove for potentially just drawing an extra card later on. So yeah, you're right. There are just 2 basics in the deck, and that costs Brandon a little bit here. Not that another basic would really help him out any at this point, but it's still nice to have as opposed to just getting nothing.
Yeah, you know, one thing Brandon did pick up was a second copy of Inkmoth Nexus. So while the first one was removed, I think the biggest appeal of that card is how it's safe from the bounce of these Planeswalkers. But right as I say that, second field kind of comes into punish. And here you see the real power of field when one player runs out of basics to fetch. You know, it's just such a brutal effect. And, you know, a lot of decks don't play that many basics, really only because Blue-White is capable of punishing them for it.
Yeah, and I mean, Ivan's actually generating card advantage just from his lands here. And that's in addition to having multiple Planeswalkers on the board that have been activating. I think we've seen Jace activate 3 times already, and Teferi once to draw, and then 3 other times, plus it might have absorbed a hit. This is getting, I mean, this is what happens when Planeswalkers go unopposed. And here we go, a non-brainstorm net. We're fate sealing, and this is what I like to see. Aggressive fate sealing with Jace.
Yeah, it's I think a pretty smart way to do it. It buys yourself multiple turns of unsummons if you need, and if you kind of feel like Brandon is in a lot of ways on the ropes, you know, it's tough. The fetch lands are going to kind of mitigate the value of a fate seal, but at least you can force Brandon to use those, and eventually he'll kind of run out of the ability to reset his top of the library. And here we even actually see both fetches get cracked at end step. So how do you feel about Brandon kind of doing that now, or do you think there is more value in holding on to him?
I think you have to hold. The odds of Ivan fate sealing again maybe not that high, but I still think you have to keep the fetch lands around. Deck thinning is been kind of derided for a long time as being not worth it, and I'm someone who's a fan of it. But even then, in this case, when you're facing, like, if you're facing a potential Jace, sure, okay, maybe you want to fetch to try and thin the deck. But facing an actual Jace that's already on the board, that seems like maybe not the play that I would be looking to make myself.
And here we see Brandon's the Dryad Arbor that he fetched on the end step tried to take out Teferi, but Ivan had been clutching a Path to Exile for a long time, and we do finally see that deployed. And here we go. This is kind of exactly where Blue-White wants to be. Cryptic Command, countering and picking up Mystic Sanctuary, and sort of setting up the first part of what can eventually be just a Cryptic Lock.
And this is there's no land destruction on Brandon's side to potentially break that. So really, in order to get out of this, we're going to have to see a Blossoming Defense type card counter the Cryptic if it's bouncing a creature, and that can't even happen with little Teferi protecting everything.
Yeah, so Ivan kind of has everything rolled up at this point. It's just a question of how is he going to properly end the game, and it's tough. You know, Infect is a deck that does rely entirely on the combat step, and it looks like another creature is going to be taken down here. Path to Exile coming back from Snapcaster Mage. I think the 3rd time it's been cast this game, and yeah, the just strictly better sword supply is really pulling its weight here.
Yeah, this is and Ivan, like you're saying, in fact, has to win through combat. Ivan doesn't even have to win. I mean, these Planeswalkers will win the game on their own. These cards that are defending him are also going to win the game. So he won't ever need to tap out main phase going forward unless he wants to. And maybe even Snapcaster Mage can do all the work. Brandon's down to 15, it's going to be obviously quite a few attack phases before the game ends, but Brandon's unlikely to make any headway against Ivan having a hand full of cards.
Yeah, I actually kind of love the combination of, as we see Brandon sort of realize the writing on the wall with the Cryptic Command every turn and packs him up. I do love the combination of the Mystic Sanctuary Cryptic Lock with Jace, making sure you can rebuy, pick up that Cryptic every turn without investing any mana in it. Just gives you the ability to play that 4-mana card every turn. I think it's not crazy new deck construction, but I do think it makes sense that Blue-White is one of the better decks to utilize. Another 2019 messed up card in
you love that, huh? See, I am not one that loves that. That doesn't seem like I like these control decks to have the potential of running out of cards eventually if you line up threat after threat after threat, and that's it's not like something that you can deploy early in the game, but yeah, you have the eventuality, and that's just and Brandon just packs it in. You're right, because there's no hope.
And so we'll see if Brandon has much room to improve in the sideboard. But starting with Ivan's Blue-White Control sideboard, there are 2 copies of Mystical Dispute, 3 Ashiok Dreamrender, 1 Circle of Protection Red, as well as 2 Celestial Purge, Stony Silence, Rest in Peace, Aether Gust, and 1 Timely Reinforcement. So kind of a smattering of things that seem reasonable. Aether Gust has the ability to effectively counter a lot of bounce spells and maybe remove a Glistener Elf. And do you like Mystical Dispute against it? In fact, there are some blue cards, but it might just be a bad mana leak in some spots.
Yeah, so we have Blighted Agent, and then it's really Blighted Agent and Cyborg cards that we're potentially hitting with Mystical Dispute, at least on the cheap half and cheap cast, and that doesn't sound like enough. Blighted Agent probably the most important creature, but that's your chances are so likely. I don't know that game. Ivan was flooded with cards in hand. He could have handled 2 opponents at once, but in another game, if Brandon gets ahead, it's not going to catch you up. I think I'd probably just leave it in the board and not worry about it.
Absolutely. So pretty light sideboarding from Ivan. How about what does Brandon have access to?
So he's got 1 Spellskite, 3 Kitchen Finks, 2 Ceremonious Rejection, 2 Veil of Summer, 2 Torpor Orb, 2 Dismember, and 3 Force of Vigor. And on this side, I think, and against really in almost any deck where you're playing against blue and counters, Veil of Summer is going to be the card you're reaching for first.
Yeah, and a great kind of standout card in the sideboard, and maybe another reason why Mystical Dispute isn't quite as good as you'd like it to be. If the counterspell, the Cryptic Command from the Infect side, is green, you're going to be trading off pretty poorly when it comes to mana efficiency.
Mm-hmm. We could see Spellskite come in. That's a lot of it'll deal with the Path to Exile. Now it's not going to handle the Supreme Verdicts or the counterspells themselves. So I don't know from the Infect side, do you have enough bad cards to take out that you want to bring the Spellskite? Possibly. We'll see what Brandon decides on that. As far as the rest of the cards, I don't know that we're too excited about any of this. It's just like removal doesn't really matter. The other counters don't really matter. Kitchen Finks is a threat that's nice against the sweepers, but I don't. It doesn't combine well with the other creatures, so I don't expect to see that either.
Yeah, I think mostly positioned for aggro matchups, or if you're playing against something like Jund that's really taxing you with 1-for-1 removal. Yeah. So looks like our players are drawing up. So why don't we swing back down for game 2 of our main feature match this round. And it's interesting, when it comes for what Brandon's going to be sideboarding out, I can't think of too many cards that are going to be poor in this matchup. Something like Distortion Strike, a card that gets around primarily creature blockers could be the worst thing. But a lot of the pump spells are good. I think Brandon's just going to try and, I think be as explosive as possible and fade some of those really powerful kind of anti-infect cards. Like we saw Teferi do, I think, just a load of work that game.
Yeah, I mean, there's really the 2 Distortion Strikes are the first 2 and maybe the only obvious cards that be boarded out. Viridian Corruptor is a slower infect creature. We're not going to get any utility value out of it in this matchup, so maybe that goes out. But other than that, there's nothing here that Brandon's not going to want. So that might line up pretty well with having only a few cards that he wants to bring in.
And here we see Ivan, I believe, taking his second mulligan, so down on 5 cards. And when it comes to the London mulligan, I think it's pretty acceptable to go low in Modern. But, blue-white control, it's a deck that it can recoup card advantage, but oftentimes comes at a big cost. And by cost, I mean mana cost. Jace the Mind Sculptor is a 4-mana way to do it. Snapcaster Mage tends to cost at least 3 to get yourself some advantage back. So I do think blue-white is a deck that kind of will feel this double mulligan here.
Mm-hmm. And it's also just a matter of it needs time to recoup its cards. In an 8-turn game, it's very likely that you could make up the difference. And then at turn 8, maybe you couldn't even, if you walked up and looked on turn 8, you couldn't even tell the difference of whether the player would start with 5 or 7 cards. But on turn 2, it's very clearly going to be, it's going to be very clear if Ivan's short on cards and Brandon's able to take advantage.
All right, and for Brandon's first turn, Shock Land here, we'll see which 1-drop he has. Noble Hierarch is the play here. You mentioned how Glistener Elf is kind of the scarier one just because of its kind of explosive potential. So Brandon is going to be more setting up his mana, being able to try and cast a threat with the ability to protect it at the same time. And it looks like that infect creature to be protected is going to be Blighted Agent this game. So we'll see what Ivan has. His first turn was just Azorius Guildgate in Celestial Colonnade getting played, and I'm actually a bit surprised to see that one. There's 3 Mystic Sanctuaries in Ivan's list. Are you worried about the tax on islands that Colonnade might put you under?
I mean, it's definitely going to matter. Certainly in this scenario, we want to be, if we draw any company play Taplands, we want to deploy them immediately. And if there's 2 complete Taplands, that by itself might put Ivan too far behind. Although we'll see what happens here. As Brandon is running out multiple spells on turn 3, we might be done real quick here. Ivan fetches, implying that he does have something here. But this is the second pump spell of the turn. Brandon still has 2 mana available. So if he does have Spell Pierce in his deck, as well as the instance that provide Hexproof or Shroud. So we'll see. Ivan might be out of here real quick. We have an opt, and this does not look good. I mean, he keeps the card, and it was a Path to Exile. So now it's just we're tapping out. I guess we could have Force of Negation to help push this through. But if not, with a Noble on the board, it's going to be 10 Infect coming over.
Yeah, the potential for a turn 3 kill, and Brandon cracking the fetch almost certainly means there's some kind of protection here. And, from Ivan's perspective, he could do much better. He had a removal spell, and he was able to cast it this turn. But, Infect is a deck with some of the highest highs in the entire modern format, and this resilient turn 3 kill, I think, really shows that off. Yeah,
I mean, being able to kill turn 3 with protection is impressive, and that's something where there's other decks in the format that are able to do.
Oh, and actually, it's not protection. This is Brandon kind of cycling a Veil of Summon to try and find a way to deal with it, and Spell Pierce off the top is going to make that work. Wow.
That really just happened. Wow. So take back everything we just said about Brandon having a protected turn 3 kill. Brandon was very all in with a prayer to not get blown out. That would have made back all the cards. Wow. That Ivan, that's going to be a tough one to swallow.
And actually looking at deck lists here, I think that, oh, wow. Just, I mean, there's probably about 7 cards that can protect from that, but, if you're Ivan and you see the fetch lane get cracked with the pass, like, you had it the whole time, whatever, man. And, when you cycle the Veils, like, my opponent either doesn't know how Path to Exile and Veil interact, or this is going to be maybe a miracle. So, yeah, that's a pretty only 3 turns of a game, but pretty wild and back and forth. And
I thought I had that thought also. It was like, does the player not realize that the Veil's not going to stop this path here? But no, they knew what they were doing. They just needed a cantrip.
Yeah, so looking at sideboards a little bit again, Joe, do you think there's anything that really changes fundamentally based on play or draw from this, or do you think we're going to kind of see a run of that?
I don't think so. Some of Ivan's, when you're going first, could you make an argument for timely reinforcements just to have blockers? Maybe. I would argue against that, but it's possible that some players could make that case, so maybe he would feel that way. I was talking to him earlier. He said he only slept 2 hours last night as his traveling companion made a lot of noise as they slept last night, so Ivan only slept about 2 hours. So maybe he's delirious. He's thinking aggressive deck, timely reinforcements, blockers, good thing. We'll see, but I don't think so. I think he probably had things pretty well set the way he wanted, and despite that game going badly, you probably chalk it up to the mull to 5 and just move on and assume you were right in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I can sympathize with Ivan. I don't know if there's a more iconic duo than Magic Trips and Cataclysmic Snoring.
Yes,
so.
no, we definitely had. I had a wall between myself last night and a loud snorer, and still the fact that it penetrated the wall at all was impressive. But I feel sympathy for whoever was next door.
And here we see for Game 3, we're leading off. Both players have their turn 1 land lined up. Brandon shocking. And again, we're seeing it looks like Glistener Elf, so kind of the more potentially explosive Infect creature. But, we noticed kind of the strength of Noble Hierarch last game, really enabling lots of mana. And again, Brandon needed every bit of it. All 4 got used in that kill turn.
Yeah, that was. I mean, you cast 4 spells on turn 3. That's crazy. That's not something you expect to have happen.
Yeah, definitely. Mana efficiency is the name of the game for Infect, and Ivan casting Opsior on turn 1. I think in terms of what he's looking for, there's a pretty strict hierarchy. Path to Exile and I think Force of Negation stand well above the rest. And what would you consider after that? Maybe Teferi the next best card?
Well, yeah, we saw it in Game 1. Teferi Time Raveler was crucial in just protecting Ivan, allowing him to reset the board early on, and then kind of negating Brandon's ability to play Vines of Astwood and Blossoming Defense to any sort of advantage. 2 early creatures here. If Ivan untaps without killing either one, this is gonna get a little dangerous, because at 3 mana, I don't believe Ivan can kill any 2 creatures.
Yeah, and this is tough. We see Teferi, but against 2 creatures in play, it's actually pretty mitigated. We see a bounce. Teferi's down to 1 loyalty and vulnerable to Glistener Elf. And, plussing Teferi with 2 creatures on board, you actually just run the risk of dying to poison the next turn.
Yeah, and you're still running that risk here. And this is scary, because at best, your Teferi dies here. And that does appear to be what's going to happen. So, escapes the turn, and also sort of gets confirmation that Brandon doesn't have just all pump spells rolled up. So there's a good chance that Ivan goes into this turn thinking, I'm probably not going to die on next turn either. So that's something of comfort.
Yeah, we see a pretty land-heavy hand with Brandon. I think he has at least 2 extra lands rolled up. But Infect is a deck that's actually pretty reasonable at using all of its mana. You see kickers for some cards like Vines of Vastwood, and also just a few lands on board. Waterlogged Grove and Inkmoth Nexus can kind of mitigate Flood for at least a little bit.
Definitely. And nice for Brandon, he hasn't drawn any of his basics this game, so Path to Exile is actually going to benefit him somewhat, as opposed to what happened in Game 1.
Yeah, I always like to joke that when I was playing Humans a lot in Modern, the second basic was kind of my blue-white hate card. And it's just it can really be the difference, because Infect can absolutely leverage that mana. And here we see Ivan kind of just prioritizing getting rid of Inkmoth Nexus, making Supreme Verdict the best draw possible by cutting any creatures that aren't vulnerable to that sorcery speed removal.
Yeah, so this Field of Ruin did a lot of work Game 1. All really similar things are happening to Game 1. And the longer the game goes, and we've already passed the point where Ivan died in Game 2. And that has to be, well, that's not really an accomplishment. That's just something that has to happen in order for you to eventually win the game. Well, we did play a Planeswalker, although it already hit the bin, which didn't happen in the first game. So we'll see how this develops. I don't think Ivan necessarily even has to defend himself this turn. Yeah, Brandon just attacks in for 2, bringing Ivan up to 3 Infect, which is still not even, no 1 spell can kill Ivan on 1 creature from here.
Yeah, it's really slow paced. Brandon actually not presenting any pump spells at all this game. Just lots of lands and creatures, and it's tough. Against these control decks, having your Infectors locked up is the most important thing. But then again, if you're actually playing an honest Infect game, trying to attack, say, 5 times, over multiple turns, it just gives your opponent so much room to find the interaction for when you do unload your first pump spell.
So here's a second copy of Teferi Time Raveler, presumably bouncing the Blighted Agent, and then immediately Ivan is just much safer, because when the Glistener Elf then attacks in next turn, even if a Snapcaster Mage has no extra mana to flash something back, just being able to trade with the Glistener Elf is a great deal for Ivan right now.
Yeah, why don't we take a closer look at Teferi Time Raveler? For 1 blue and a white, you get a 3-mana Planeswalker with a pretty nifty passive saying each opponent can only play spells at any time they could cast a sorcery, which is huge in this matchup to kind of fight off all the pump. It's +1, gives your sorcery spells flash until the end of the next turn. And for -3, you can return a artifact, creature, or enchantment to its owner's hand and draw a card. So Teferi kind of being used, and every part of it is relevant in this matchup, and it's just been a kind of defining card in standard, Pioneer, Modern since it's been released.
Even Legacy, it's also a very important card in Legacy. Now, with Brendan fetching out Drydark at the end of the turn, he sets up a desirable spot here where he can attack to kill the Teferi and then probably also attack Ivan if he would like. It wasn't clear to me when it looked like he was attacking both creatures at Teferi. We'll find out. We'll wait and see what happens here.
Yeah, attacking both the Teferi would kind of allow Brandon to play around Snapcaster Mage just as Ambush Pfeiffer, and looks like Teferi does go down. Ivan prioritizing, getting rid of the Glistener Elf, and that might actually lead me to believe that the Elf was attacking his face this turn. And as we see, that's a Blighted Agent that was bounced to get recast, and looks like Brandon might be kind of intentionally skipping some land drops if I saw that right. I'm not sure if I caught it, but that could be a pretty clever thing. If you have all the mana you need, just force your opponent to respect a little bit more than what you have.
Yeah, and if he has the Forest in his hand, it would also be, if he played another Forest here, Ivan would have knowledge that he could freely Field of Ruin any land, any non-basic, and effectively strip mine Brandon. And there's no way Ivan's going to do that, not knowing that case. Although the Forest does come down here, so either Brandon needs it or he's just decided to give up the bluff.
Yeah, and here we see Brandon said, "I've had enough waiting around. I found a pump spell in Might of Volcrosa, and I'm going to cast it." But from Ivan's perspective, that is only representing 5 poison. So he has a little bit more, life total, or not exactly life total, but to play with here. And we'll see if Brandon wants to commit anything else.
Yeah, if there was a spot removal spell, Ivan might have to debate whether it would be worth just absorbing that hit and then doing it end of turn. But here we see Cryptic Command tap and draw, which is great because that's, again, it's a straight 2-for-1 because we traded for the Might of Volcrosa.
And Brandon playing another Blighted Agent, and this board is looking particularly ripe for a Supreme Verdict, and it can be an awkward card against Infect mostly because of Inkmoth Nexus, but if it comes off the top any point in this game, I think Ivan would be overjoyed.
Yes, I'm sure that has to be the number one card he's looking for right now. How many sweepers are we playing in the deck?
Looks like, I think, 2 Supreme Verdicts.
Two verdicts, and then plus we have 1 Winds of Abandon, which at this point could be kicked to clear the board as well. But here, another Cryptic Command tap, so this is just buying time for Ivan. Cryptic Command with 4 options. This kind of the scourge of mid-range decks in Modern for quite a while now. You may choose 2 options: counter target spell, return target permanent to its owner's hand, tap all creatures your opponent's control, and draw a card. And so we've seen the last 2 turns, the bottom 2 modes, tap all creatures your opponent's control and draw a card. So Ivan is basically fogging without card disadvantage, and Brandon is just forced to wait through the turns. He's not really anything he's doing to break that up.
Yeah, we kind of see every part of Cryptic Command used really effectively, especially with the addition of Mystic Sanctuary. And it's just the flexibility of the card, the fact that it gives you game against everything but the fastest aggro decks, and also gives you enough counter spells to not get run over by combo. Yeah, definitely been a stalwart of Modern, and it really has seen a big resurgence because of that new Eldraine land.
So here we have the other Teferi, I believe. That's Teferi, Hero of Dominaria with the other art. And so this, we'll see, is Ivan's just drawing cards here. Minusing to tuck down one of the Blight Agents may not do him a whole lot of good, as Teferi would just get picked off immediately. So we see just basically Ivan putting the question to Brandon now. Do you have enough to try and push through a kill on me, or do you try and chip down the Teferi?
And that's tough. I mean, taking, in the best case scenario, two turns off your attacking to kill Teferi, it's just, I don't know. It almost seems like an impossible situation for Brandon because he still really hasn't found that much in the way of pump spells. And, he's kind of, the beauty of Teferi is that it's a 5-mana Planeswalker that functions like it costs 3. And Ivan's able to commit it to the board without actually really risking his position all that much.
So here the attack. Okay, I will admit to being surprised here. So Brandon decides that the Dried Arbor actually is worthwhile as a mana source here, which means that we're probably almost definitely attacking Ivan himself down. And going for the win, which Snapcaster Mage, Flashing Back Path to Exile, Blossoming Defense in response to give Hexproof to the Blight Agent, which Ivan might be at risk here of dying, and yet, oof. Force of negation.
It's just been lurking in his hand all game. Ivan, I think, very patiently waiting until the critical fight to unload it. And if this works, that Blighted Agent's going to go, and with it, almost all of Brandon's pressure.
All of his pressure, and the Teferi. I mean, Ivan will take, what, 1 infect, go up to 4. That's really not. His position hasn't changed. He's still healthy. And then Teferi's stabilized on the board, and Brandon's got a lot of work to do now.
Yes, sir. While the shields are mostly down, Brandon's saying, I'm going to use this opportunity to squeak in this mutagenic growth. It puts Ivan to 6, which does open up more possibilities for combinations of pump spells to actually present lethal. But it's tough. You're going to have to slog through about twice as much interaction while Teferi continues to chug up towards that ultimate.
Yeah, and now with only 1 infect creature left on the board, presumably heading into Ivan's next turn, now the Teferi minus ability to get rid of the Blight Agent becomes something that really a strong consideration, especially with the Snapcaster Mage able to block the Dried Arbor or the Field of Ruin able to destroy it.
And another interesting thing, I think this is the final fetchable land for Brandon. So he has a fetch land in play, and I think at least 1 more in hand, which are just completely dead cards at this point, besides, land falling for, I believe it's Groundswell. So, yeah, the Noble Hierarch that's added, actually kind of relevant for the clock here. That's going to double up the speed that Blighted Agent can kill. But then again, if Ivan ever feels the need to deal with that, a Teferi can also, it's not just a card draw engine, it's also really flexible interaction, and a -3 could remove that agent for a few turns.
Now, like you're saying that Brandon potentially being out of fetchable lands, that's something that Ivan certainly isn't going to realize, but it would allow his Field of Ruin even more options. Like if we see the minus ability on, I'll scratch that. First we're going to play Teferi Time Raveler, and now there's going to be a host of options here. So we drew off of large Teferi first, and then we're playing little Teferi. Is that what happened? I looked down for a second.
Yeah, that's all we've seen so far. Right now, Ivan kind of deciding, what, if anything, do I want to bounce in? Yeah, not surprised to see Blighted Agent at least get picked up for a turn. Another land off the top, not ideal for Ivan, but honestly, Brandon's done a lot of damage to himself with the mana base, fetching, and shocking. It's not that many Celestial Colonnade hits if Ivan chooses to close the game out that way.
No, it absolutely is not. In fact, Snapcaster Mage could even get in to potentially be a 2-turn clock. That's unlikely, as it would leave Ivan's Planeswalkers pretty vulnerable. But actually, the Colonnade chooses not even to attack it either. So we're just going to play out the long game, let the Planeswalkers do their thing, activate turn after turn, and see if that is enough to take it home.
Yeah, it's tough. Besides the Blighted Agent, the rest of Brandon's creatures are actually colded pretty badly by the Snapcaster Mage. And here we see Vendilion Click targeting Brandon. Kind of the mystery's done. Ivan knows that the coast is completely clear, and looks like this is actually, I think, an end step, tap your team cryptic command. He really wants to get aggressive immediately.
Yeah, that's interesting, because this is all his creatures sent in. This is not going to be lethal. Oh, okay, we're bouncing the Snapcaster Mage. Nice.
Oh, okay, yep. So the countering the Blighted Agent, removing the last Infector, and resetting Snapcaster, really fantastic. It's just a super clean way to have an extra Cryptic Command without the Mystic Sanctuary.
Yeah, so really the original method of Cryptic Sanctuary is Cryptic your Snapcaster Mage, as we see here. And now more Planeswalker activations. Teferi Hero is probably going up to 7 after we fetch the Sanctuary out of the deck. And Ivan just has everything going in his favor right now.
Yeah, at this point, I think it's fair to say that the lock has been implemented. Pretty soon it's going to be joined with a Teferi emblem, and there's just not enough pump spells or protection spells in the world for Infect to stave that off forever.
No, there's sure not Infect nor any other deck. This is getting... So now Ivan is probably free to attack, and yet may not even feel the need to do it. Let's see what he's lining up here. No, he just passes. Yeah, okay. Brandon, what do you have for us? That looked like a pass. Yep.
Yeah, keeping all the mana up does afford kind of maximum flexibility with Cryptic and also giving yourself a Colonnade block too. So, yeah, it makes sense Ivan's playing kind of a patient game here because, yeah, the game's sort of his as long as he doesn't get too, too hyped up and too overzealous to close the game quickly. He should be able to take this.
Yeah, and this is Teferi. I mean, he's so safe right now. The Teferi Hero of Dharma even would have the opportunity to go up to 9 if Ivan felt like it. As there's no cards in Brandon's deck that are going to directly kill the Teferi. It'd have to be attacked down, and that just seems difficult at the moment with a combined 0 power on the board among his 2 creatures. The Exalted Triggers obviously represent some attacking damage, but Ivan doubling up on the Mystic Sanctuary here to... I don't even know what the hope would be at this point for Brandon's side.
Yeah, second Cryptic Command's pretty nice, and... yeah, looks like Ivan's going to actually drag the game out a little bit longer. Teferi's going up to 9 here, which, I think that's fair. Teferi Emblem with a Teferi still in play is kind of the most powerful setup for to take advantage of that. And we'll see if Brandon takes an additional draw step here.
Yeah, it may not be necessary at this point, but it is very safe. And Ivan looking in a good spot to move on to 3-0 here today. And probably feeling good about that because yesterday did not go particularly well for him in Pioneer. Once upon a time for Brandon, what are we looking for? We're looking for a threat. We're looking for, what are we looking for, a concession? I don't know what's going to happen here. Blade Agent is fine.
I mean, it's a creature. It's a legal thing to put in your hands.
Yeah, it is, yes. I mean, really... Brandon, you played well. You took down the game, but at this point, the only thing we can really try and achieve is to avoid getting a warning or a game loss or disqualified because there's no real hope we're going to win this match.
Well, you got to appreciate the fact, Joe, that some players maximizing your time on camera,
yes,
I think is absolutely a thing.
Yeah, sure.
Sometimes it just take some game actions just because. And here we see a Noble Hierarch tapping for a Glistener Elf. So Brandon not out of threats on the board, but. Yeah, Cryptic Command says, nope, going to keep your Infect count at 0. And picking up that Mystic Sanctuary, yeah, the lock is pretty well and truly in place.
Yeah, Brandon drew more lands than he wanted to this game. And while he did have the pump spells rolled up, the Path to Exile from Ivan and the Force really were what took this game down. So even though it looks like a complete landslide in Ivan's favor at this point, this game was very close. And round about 6 or 8 turns ago, Brandon almost had the match won.
So there we see it. Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, does make its emblem here, -8, and that means whenever Ivan does draw a card, he's going to be able to exile a permanent of his choice. And there's a lot over on the Infect side, and looks like we finally do see, I think, the Snapcaster attack this turn, so Ivan's getting a little bit aggressive, and yeah, still clutching Cryptic Command with Mystic Sanctuary, I believe, to reset another one from the graveyard. Some of those nice foils have a little bit of glare on them, but I think there's a Cryptic on top of the yard.
And we have Teferi Time Raveler representing by itself the clearing of Brandon's board if Ivan wants it. So we have a orange-colored sideboard divider maybe representing the Teferi emblem, I guess. And then here's the minus from the other Teferi to wipe everything out. And so one Noble Hierarch went to hand, one went to exile. Brandon, you played well. We're gonna keep trying.
What's the protocol on kindly asking a player to tap out? Like you know, in boxing matches where someone is clearly just bloodied, and if they stay in, they're just gonna have some permanent damage. So we need a judge to intervene at this point, right?
That seems harsh. Brandon is entitled to play until his life total hits 0, which is probably only going to be a few more seconds.
Yeah.
But yeah, maybe he has his friends that he rode to the tournament with. Maybe one of them could just walk up and tell him, "Hey man, just end it. This is there it is."
Yeah, Brandon fetching himself down to 0 after a big attack comes in with the Colonnades. And, yeah, Ivan with a couple of pretty impressive game wins. And, I think it just kind of showed how close some of the margins can be in these matchups because, the mana was really constrained. And I think it did come down to a timely Force of Negation, just giving Ivan the flexibility to match the Infect deck, even though his spells cost a bit more.
Yeah, and that was, Brandon, we had a little fun at your expense there as you got rolled over at the end of the game. But really very close match. I mean, it couldn't get much closer. Ivan basically was, you're saying he was tapped out, and he needed to have some interaction, and he did have it. And so the deck building came together. That's what the Force of Negation is really in the deck to do, and it worked out just the way Ivan could have dreamed up.
Yeah, so it looks like we have a little bit more Magic to bring you this round. Our backup feature match, we can go super speed on the time walk here. We're going to have Mac Endress playing Amulet Titan against Ben Gradert's Jund deck. So I think a matchup that has been pretty favored on the Amulet Titan side for a while. Jund's gotten some new tools, though. I think the most notable card being added to this deck is actually a couple copies of Kroxa in Jund.
Sure. I mean, Kroxa is a new card from Theros Beyond Death. Really, really neat card. Puts a lot of pressure on both the hand size and the life total. And then escape cost, nice for Jund to be able to use up his cards in the graveyard. But this ramp against Jund, I mean, Jund has done historically poorly against Tron, and Amulet Titan is really, in a lot of ways, similar to Tron, except it's faster and more explosive with its top draws, which generally include Amulet, and we see Mackenzie with an Amulet here on turn 1.
Yeah, interesting that was actually left in Mackenzie's hand by Ben. I mean, Inquisition did have the option to take that. Ben instead, respecting the possibility of the kind of Valakut Dryad combo, and taking the Dryad instead. And Kroxa actually cast on turn 2, doing its best Burglar Rat impression, getting a castle out of Mac's hand, which is actually pretty relevant. You know, removing a mana source, a big deal. And here's, I think, the big explanation for why that stuck.
Wow.
K-Command taking the Amulet and Azusa in one super clean turn.
That was fantastic. I would have said Ben was really, really far behind, and now looks like in very strong position. Mackenzie with only 2 mana on the board, facing down a Bloodbraid Elf. Yikes! That was a dream at Colgan's command.
Yeah, that really excellent sequence, and now it's kind of Bloodbraid Elf against the world. Mac just needs a couple more turns to develop these Titans, but Termaglyph helps that clock a little bit until at least the Bojuka Bog wipes the graveyard.
And Bojuka Bog with the probably lesser used Bojuka Bog myself, because I have more stuff than you do to minimize the Tarmogoyf damage incoming. Looks like it's coming in for 2 this turn, and probably was more in the range of 4 or 5 before that.
Yeah, and really close game at this point. Mac actually just needs any land off the top is going to enable these Primeval Titans, and once that happens, Field of the Dead's online, and these attackers are kind of nullified. So, yeah, this is a really close one. Ben just needs to fade any land from the 30-land deck here. So the odds aren't great, but it kind of just shows how resilient Amulet Titan can be, even after getting hosed by that goal against
it's impressive. I mean, if you're on Ben's side, you're like, I did everything I could, and, well, it does win the game, but that was closer than it feels like it should have been after the way some of those turns progressed.
Yeah, we saw Mac miss on lands the last 2 turns, finding a medium Azusa and a Summoner's Pact instead. So yeah, Ben steals a squeaker game 1. Now, why don't we quickly take a look over the sideboards here, starting with Mac Endress's Amulet Titan, a few 1-ofs, Field of the Dead, Radiant Fountain, Engineered Explosives, to go along with 2 ofs of Aether Gust, Beast Within, Dismember, and Mystical Dispute. We'll surround it out with 1 Reclamation Sage, Tireless Tracker, and 2 Force of Vigor. So some real standouts here. Field of the Dead just crushes a lot of these mid-range decks in Modern. Engineered Explosives, great against a deck that's primarily loaded up on 2 drops like Jund is, between Termaglyph, Dark Confidant, and even Kroxa. And it makes a lot of sense to have Tireless Tracker here as well. You can really stack up quite a few clues with the bounce lands especially.
Yeah, it's nice to build, and against any deck with discard, pure card advantage is a great way to dig yourself out, and that's really what Tireless Tracker is. Interesting in the building of Amulet Titan, both of the lands in the sideboard also appear in the main deck, so it's just a matter of what do we want more of in different matchups. I wouldn't be, you're saying the Field of the Dead seems great here. Maybe the main deck Radiant Fountain comes out to swap for it if Mac doesn't want to just increase his total land count.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense just understanding, those lands are definitely good against very different things. And, so why don't we swing it down to game 2. Jund's got a lot of great sideboard cards, but it's still going to have some big problems. Really, the big thing is containing the Amulets, the Mana Base, and the Titans. So we see a couple copies. The big one, Fulminator Mage, really potent against some of these bounce lands.
Only 2, but very strong card. If we're not going to 2 for 1, but we can tempo-wise 2 for 1 if we can hit a bounce land that wasn't cheated into play.
Yeah, and from the Jund side, I think if you could sculpt a perfect hand, it would probably contain Thoughtseize, Tarmogoyf, and Fulminator Mage. Right? It's sort of what you're looking for?
That sounds perfect. And we're on a mulligan here on Ben's side. And we do see Amulet. So, okay, we have the Thoughtseize. Unfortunately, the Amulet's already on the board. And we see a Gruul Turf, a Castle, I think a Summoner's Pact, and whatever the card on the left is, I can't make out.
Primeval Titan. Which
okay, it is a Primeval Titan.
Actually, yeah, that redundancy kind of makes it tough for Ben to have a great Thoughtseize. You know, getting rid of the Summoner's Pact, because that's sort of just the Titan that has extra flexibility. So it definitely makes a lot of sense there, and we'll see if Ben can follow up with a threat. No, actually just more disruption. Thoughtseize number 2 can certainly tag this Titan.
And yeah, more redundancy is, I believe, the card drawn from Mackenzie is a Once Upon a Time there, which could potentially lead to another Titan or whatever else the Summoner's Pact might have wanted to get. Could also be an additional land drop, which we may end up being desirable as well.
And yeah, exactly as you called it, Primetime amongst the cards that Matt could choose, and it looks like that is in fact the choice. You know, makes sense. You're going to need it eventually. Ben can only have so many discard spells that can reach up to the 6 drop. And
if I'm Ben here, I just cast 2 Thoughtseizes, took a Primeval Titan, an effective Primeval Titan, and yet my opponent still has a Primeval Titan. And a Liliana, and then another one. All right, so 3 Primeval Titans effectively in the bin, leaving something like 11 left in Mackenzie's deck. So we'll see how this plays out.
But let me tell you, if you played Jund as long as I have, you get used to those kinds of beats. That's just life in the office.
All right, a fairly sizable Tarmogoyf comes down here for Ben. Unclear exactly what the power is right now. It's going to be at least 3, and it's, well, hopefully it's at least 4 if we can attack through that the Dryad, which immediately gets killed by Liliana, so it doesn't become an issue. And now with the Dryad is also an enchantment, is it not?
Yeah, and that will hope speed up Ben's clock a little bit with the 5/6 Tarmogoyf. And right now Mac has just enough mana to cast a Primeval Titan off the top, courtesy of that Castle Garenbrig. So really close for Ben. He's just trying to do his best to squeak out as fast as possible. And here we see Raging Ravine come in to speed up that clock.
Yeah, and this is going to be, there may be other things that could help out, but Mackenzie finds no business whatsoever, and Ben takes it down.
Yeah, that was impressive. Definitely a very rough matchup for Jund. Ben was able to take a couple close games, and he just had to answer effectively 3 Primeval Titans, and importantly, not letting them hit the board in the process.
Right.
So, yeah, very well done there. Ben's up to 3-0, and just a couple matches away from being in a great spot to top 8.
Yeah, I mean, he's got to be excited about the start. I mean, all the players here, we're playing 7 rounds today. So we're looking at the double draw spot being after 5 rounds this time around, as opposed to 6 yesterday. And yeah, he's more than halfway there.
Yeah, so it looks like that's everything we have for round 3. We'll be back in just a couple minutes with Joe and Matt in the booth for some more Modern action. So don't go anywhere, and we'll be right back.